Okay, very good. So now we're going to finish off with the third part of chapter one, and now we're going to get into some political theory and also discuss the nature of the political culture of Texas here. So let me go ahead and share the screen here. That way we can continue here. Okay, hold on. Wait, hold on. Let me go back over here. And let's see. It's because for some reason it's not sharing the way I wanted to. Okay, okay, okay. I think I got it now. I've been using this for years and I'm still not the best at it. Okay, so like I said, we'll go ahead and like I said, we're going to go ahead and try to get through this as quickly as possible. But like I said, if you have to leave, it's totally okay. Okay, so let's give a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about some democratic theory here. So let's go over some definitions. So again, if you've taken federal government, this probably sounds familiar to you all. Democracy, as defined here in the book, is the form of government based on the theory that the legitimacy of any government must come from the free participation of its citizens. So, right, if you've studied democracy, and some people, one of my colleagues talks about like, oh, like the United States is not a democracy; it's a republic and all this, and I'm like, yes, that's true, but it's a republic with democratic principles and all that stuff. So for me, I kind of think of that more as like semantics. But again, he's entitled to his opinion, but I don't know. It's for me, it's I think people understand what we mean by that. But the point is that when we look at what a democracy is supposed to be, is that it's supposed to be a form of government where the people are the ones who ultimately have the ultimate power, or at least they're supposed to, right? If you look at the way our leaders are selected, well, they're not supposed to be selected, they're supposed to be elected, right? We are the ones who are supposed to decide who our leaders are supposed to be. Now, do keep in mind that this is in theory, right? So whether a democracy is healthy or not, or levels of health, that's a whole nother story. And if we wanted to talk about the health of American democracy, we could be here all day because there's a whole bunch of stuff we could go into, such as issues like gerrymandering, issues like with privately funded elections and super PACs and Citizens United. There's a whole bunch of stuff we could get into. But if we're just looking at it from a theory perspective, the idea is that a true democracy, the power is supposed to come from the people because they are allowed to freely participate within government through normally through the election process, but also to petition their government, like we have in the First Amendment of our U.S. Constitution. Now, legitimacy is people's belief that their government is morally just and that they are therefore obligated to obey its laws. And so this is where we start to get a little bit into kind of like the haziness aspect, right? Because this whole concept of legitimacy, it's going to be different for everyone, right? Everyone's going to have different opinions about whether they believe that government is, and again, and you also have to keep in mind that there are levels to this, right? That because morally just, maybe they are morally just in some ways, maybe not in others, or maybe they could be more just. You see how it's all subjective here, and that's why different people. That's why, especially in America, we see that people have very strong opinions about politics and about government, right? Because a lot of people have different viewpoints on whether they do believe government is morally just or whether they believe the actions that government takes are just. But the point is that if people don't feel the government is just, then they are not going to feel obligated to obey the laws, right? Um, and we see this, right? We see this where that's another reason why, if let's say, because I know in more recent years, there's been a lot of these videos, if you see on YouTube, they call them these First Amendment auditors. I think I mentioned them before. And so they're meant to ensure that, people's First Amendment rights are being respected in public areas. And then they also have a lot of interactions with law enforcement. And sometimes those interactions aren't really the best. And so people watch those videos and they're, that erodes public trust in the law, when it comes to law enforcement, but also within government in general, right? So it's definitely a very difficult situation where people, if they feel strongly about something, then they might have to take action, like we kind of saw with, on January 6th, 2021, right? You all familiar with that incident, right? With the Trump supporters going and storming the Capitol, right, and trying to disrupt the electoral college count. And so even though it was already a formality, but the point is that it's that's an extreme example of people basically taking the law into their own hands and trying to, fight back against a government that they felt was morally unjust. But again, that's their interpretation of it, right? And then, of course, private influence over public policy. This is also a major issue that, going back to the populism movement, right, and the Grange movement that we talked about a little earlier, right? That do people believe that government is working for them, or do they feel that government is working more so for the companies and the corporations? Do corporations have more power than the average person? I think a lot of people would probably agree with it, right? And so, how does that make people feel? Do people like that or not like that? Well, a lot of people probably wouldn't like that, right? Because they feel that that might violate the essence of what democracy is supposed to be. That it's supposed to be one person, one vote. That it doesn't matter how much money you have. That if we're both citizens, our vote should count the same. But again, this is in theory, right? And so it might not necessarily be as straightforward as we would like it to be, right? Okay, so let's talk about the qualities of a well-run democracy. So politicians debate questions of public policy honestly, which again we're going to see if that happens with the presidential debate that's coming up next week. Media reports debate in a fair manner. People, basically they stick to the issues. People pay attention to the debate. People vote their preferences consistently with their understanding of public interest, and government decisions are made on the basis of law without anyone having an unearned advantage. Now, we're going to talk more about this later on in this class as to, does Texas meet, this idea of a well-run democracy? But I wanted to give you all this as the blueprint for how a democracy is supposed to operate, where you have informed citizens that make their decisions based on logic and reason. They look at the facts and then they make those choices based on the facts that are presented to them. But as we're going to see here, unfortunately, there's a lot that remains to be desired when it comes to looking at the United States and also Texas as, is it a well-run democracy? Because unfortunately, in the most recent years, we've seen a lot of these debates have delved into like personal attacks. It's not about the issues. It's about, it becomes a popularity contest. Media might have certain agendas, both on the left and the right, where they're trying to push narratives. People might pay attention to the debate, but it might not necessarily be for the so-called informed reasons. It might just kind of be for entertainment, just to kind of see like people throw verbal zingers at each other because people might find that entertaining. Again, are people going to vote based on logic and reason and research, or is it going to just be based on feelings and emotions and and maybe even fears, things like that? And so as you can see, there's a lot. I'm giving you all some examples, right? That maybe within our democracy, that it might not be as well run as we might like it to be. So okay, let's talk about Texas as a federal system. So again, this is a little bit more discussing government 2305. So in the federal system, the federal system is a system of government that provides for a division and sharing of powers between the national government and state or regional government. So if you took federal government, you're probably familiar with this concept. We saw this in Government 2305. The third chapter talks about federalism. There's a whole chapter that's devoted to this whole concept. But basically, in a nutshell, what federalism is, as it's defined here, is that you don't just have one level of government controlling everything. You have different levels of government, and they're responsible for their own unique set of government responsibilities. You don't have the federal government dictating to the states and local government to do every single thing. Instead, you have the federal government that handles their responsibilities, which mostly deal with interstate responsibilities, issues that affect all 50 states, or issues that deal with other countries, right? So like foreign policy and interstate issues, that's where the federal government comes in, because you wouldn't want to have you don't want to leave that up to the states, because Texas can't tell Louisiana or New Mexico what to do because they're both on the same level. But the federal government, because they are comprised of all the states, they would be able to step in whenever there's a disagreement between those states here. Now, what's also important, as we're going to talk about here later on, is that the Constitution also outlines that the federal government only has certain responsibilities and everything else is supposed to be left up to the states. So that's why things like education are left up to the states, because education is not mentioned in the Constitution. The states have a lot more of this direct power over more local affairs, because since states are closer to the people in terms of being able, the government officials are closer because they're more local. it makes sense that they would handle more of those local issues because they are more local within our community. Would you rather have someone who's from our community and meets in Austin or meets in Washington to decide things? I think most people would probably want for the person, the people meeting there within Austin, because at least that's within our more local community, as opposed to going across the country. But again, this is just a very broad overview of what the federal system is supposed to be, where the federal government has their responsibilities and the states have their own unique responsibilities, which we'll talk more about that here in this class. Okay, let's get to let's see. So should Texas have a foreign policy? So this, of course, is another major question that I want for us to also kind of look at here. And again, you all can read through the pros and cons yourself. I just want to bring this up as a key question, that this is a key controversy that's going on right now today, right? Because on the one hand, you have, as it says here, when it comes to when we're looking at this here, on the one hand, we see that federal responsibilities, like I was talking about right now, when it comes to relations between between the United States and other countries, that's supposed to be done by the federal government, because Texas can't just go and enter into agreements with Mexico. It's supposed to be done at the federal level. But again, the key question is, what happens if the state of Texas does not feel that the federal government is doing a good enough job when it comes to the relationships with Mexico, especially when it comes to like border security? Because that's the issue that Governor Abbott is bringing up, and we will talk about this throughout the class here. That Governor Abbott has an issue with. He feels that the federal government is not doing a good enough job to secure the border. That's basically his contention. Now, that's obviously, of course, he has the right to that opinion, and he has the right to express that politically, right? I mean, I'm sure he's basing it on a lot of observations and things, that have occurred, right? It's not just coming out of nowhere. But the question is, does he have the legal authority to do anything about it? Now, again, you could make an argument that he does, because if you have this unsecure border, at least in his eyes, it's unsecure. And of course, he also has data to back up his conclusion about that. That his argument would be that if you've got all of this, these undocumented immigrants coming over, they're not just coming over into the United States, but they're also coming over into the state of Texas, and they're also coming over into, let's say, like Hidalgo County, right, where we're at. So he would make an argument that undocumented immigration doesn't just affect the federal government, but it also even more directly affects the state and local government, because the state and local officials are the ones who also have to deal with the ramifications of it. It's not just the Border Patrol, but also DPS and also local law enforcement like the Hidalgo County Sheriff's Department or Mission PD or whatever, if they're crossing over near Mission. So you see how it's definitely a very complicated issue, and it definitely requires a lot of. I definitely want to see the courts weigh in on this. I mean, they sort of have, but I definitely would like to get like a more like concrete decision on this. To like if the Supreme Court would decide more on this, because it's definitely a key constitutional question, and it does require a lot of discussion, because I can definitely see both sides to this argument. So, but again, I just wanted to explain that, and then, like I said, we'll talk more about that as we continue on. Okay, so I would say this is probably the most important thing that I want you all to remember from this chapter. In fact, the first discussion goes into detail on this. So let's take a look at political culture. Let me just see how much we have left. Okay, we don't have too much left. Okay, we'll finish probably, hopefully, maybe in about 10 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about political culture here really quickly. So political culture is a shared framework of values, beliefs, and habits of behavior with regard to government and politics within which a particular political system functions. Now, when you have a country as large as the United States, with the 50 states and all the different regions, and even within the states, there's different cultures. I mean, even here in Texas. So in the last couple of years, I've done a lot of traveling across Texas. Mostly because I'm trying to, because I'm trying to see if I can get hired at some of these other colleges, to teach remotely, and maybe also over there in the summers. But But the thing that strikes me in terms of traveling across Texas is how different the cultures can be. Like the culture here in South Texas is very unique and very different from culture that you might see over in East Texas. And several years ago, I spent a lot of time in East Texas because I think I mentioned to you all that I had an ex-girlfriend that lived over in the Nacogdoches Lufkin area. That's very close to Louisiana. That's almost to Louisiana. So I basically was traveling across the state to go see her. So the culture over there is very different, and not just the terrain, because obviously, of course, that's in the piney woods where you've got, which is very, very beautiful. You've got the really tall loblolly pines, and very beautiful. Even in Houston, they have the loblolly pines too. But if you've ever spent time over there, you'll know that not just the terrain is different, but so is the culture. Like, you know, it's obviously, of course, heavily influenced more so by the American South. So it feels like you're more like in Alabama than you are maybe like it feels more like Alabama than even Texas in some places, right? Because it's just so similar culturally. That whole Piney Woods region and then stretches into Louisiana, Mississippi. It's all very, very similar. So you're going to have that difference. I also spent a lot of time in Waco for one summer, and Waco's also very beautiful, but it's very heavily religiously influenced by the Baptist Church. Obviously, of course, you see Baylor University, a private Baptist institution. Baptist churches everywhere, right? I probably saw a couple Catholic churches, but for the most part, the Baptist churches they dominate that part of the state. So you can tell that it's a very socially conservative area. So again, it's just interesting, right, to see how different parts of the state are just they just reflect the different cultures of the people within those areas, right? So in terms of Texas, we're going to see what type of culture do we see in Texas when it comes to those values and beliefs? And what we mean by values and beliefs, what it's talking about here is that it's talking about when people look at, because it's in relation to government. So when people look at government, these different cultures are going to have different viewpoints on what they believe government should do or not do, or problems that the government should work on or not work on. Because it's not just about whether government should get involved, it's also how much they should get involved, or if they should even get involved, maybe get involved in some areas, but not others. So I want you all to kind of get that mindset in terms of that's what political culture is supposed to be about. It's supposed to determine how people view government involvement within people's everyday lives and whether that should happen or not. So let's take a look at the first one. So moralistic political culture. The culture dominant in the northern tier of American states, in which citizens understand the state and the nation as commonwealths designed to further the shared interest of everyone, citizen participation is a widely shared value, and governmental activism on behalf of the common good is encouraged. So this is definitely your more liberal type of political culture, the moralistic political culture. You see this in areas like in the Northeast, New York, the New England states, Massachusetts. You also see that like in the upper Midwest states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, and you also see this like on the West Coast, like California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii. The idea behind moralistic political culture is that it's more of a communal type of political culture where we're all in this together. We're here, to help our community, as it mentions here, right? The shared interests of everyone. We're supposed to try to help each other out, and it's also good to engage in citizen participation, especially with voting. That's why it's not a surprise that the state of Minnesota statistically has had the highest voter turnout rates of the country. That's also why it's not really a surprise that Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, was picked as Kamala Harris's running mate. So again, tapping into this whole concept, and if any of y'all have ever seen Tim Walz, you could probably get a sense for, right, because he's a former, he was a former high school teacher, so the work that he did also was very moralistic, trying to educate students. That's looked at as a very noble profession. So again, so it's not surprising that when you look at Tim Walz, that he is a good example of this moralistic political culture. So if you've had a chance to study him a little bit, you'll see what I'm talking about, right? That he definitely has that he would definitely be classified as having that moralistic political culture, right? And and that again, that governmental activism is good, right? That they encourage political participation, that it's good that you don't just vote, but you also attend rallies and go to board meetings and make your voice heard. So again, this is the dominant political culture in the more liberal and northern parts of the country. Now, you don't really see this in Texas, except for the Austin area. The Austin area, I would say, definitely has a lot of this moralistic political culture. But again, that's why, like we talked about last time, that's why a lot of Texans aren't really too happy with Austin, right? They kind of feel like, that Austin is becoming, like we said, not Texas, right? It's a departure from the dominant political cultures of Texas here. I also wanted to share another story. When I did go to that conference in New York, when I and the conference was at was at a hotel in Times Square, which I got to stay at, and very, very cool that I got to stay at that. Probably the nicest hotel I've ever stayed at in my life. I don't know if I'll ever stay at a nicer one than that. I could actually see Times Square outside my hotel room. It was really cool. But when I was walking to my hotel room there in Times Square, I don't know why I heard this. There was a bunch. There obviously, of course, if any of you have ever been to New York, you'll know that it's just totally crammed with people. So for some reason, when I was when I was going through the crowd, getting to my hotel room, there was a bunch of people talking, right? But the one thing that I heard, and I promise you, I'm not making this up. The one thing I heard out of all of that chatter, all of that loud noise, I heard someone in the crowd say, "If you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart." And I'm like, when I heard that, I was like, wow, I am definitely not in Texas anymore. Like that, that's when it kind of hit me that culturally, politically, culturally, this area is not like Texas at all. So it was interesting to get, to get a sense of that, right? To get a sense for the differences in political cultures across, different parts of the country here. But so I just wanted to share that as something that, as a story that I've experienced, being in one of these places with moralistic political culture. So again, mostly not in Texas except for Austin, but in those areas. Now, let's get to the two that, spoiler alert, we see more so in Texas. So individualistic. So you would say this is kind of like kind of the opposite of moralistic. So the culture historically dominant in the middle tier of American states. This would be like the Great Plains, like your Kansas, Nebraska, those areas. But also in Texas here, because as I mentioned, Texas is going to be a mix of these two here. Um, Individualistic political culture occurs in which citizens understand the state and nation as marketplaces in which people strive to better their personal welfare. Citizen participation is encouraged as a means of individual achievement, and government activity is encouraged when it attempts to create private opportunity and discouraged when it attempts to redistribute wealth. So again, you can compare these two and you can see that they're pretty much polar opposites to each other. They're diametrically opposed to each other. So let's kind of break this down here, right? So in individualist political culture, as it's defined, it focuses on the individual. So the main goal of individualistic political culture is for individuals to succeed, right? For people to be able to better themselves through, being able to be, to, how would you say it? Being able to function, on their own in terms of having, a good job and being able to buy their own house and being able to make it on their own, so to speak, right? So it does focus on, people being able to make it themselves without too much government assistance, because in moralistic political cultures, you do see that there are more government programs. There's more funding for government programs, especially for people who are, needing help, such as welfare programs. But in individualistic political cultures, welfare is not, it's definitely not encouraged, and traditionalistic, it's certainly not encouraged, because in individualistic political cultures, they view people who are needing welfare assistance, they view them as like failing at life, so to speak. Even though and there is some truth to where there are some circumstances where people do abuse the system. But again, we'll talk about that later on, how that might be a little bit overblown. But it is, but again, I'm trying to explain that this is the way individualistic political cultures have, they're not so willing to, to fund these government welfare programs, because they might feel that people might become addicted to it and might just not want to move up and want to work for themselves, so to speak. Which again, I'm not saying that actually happens when it comes to like as a whole. There are some examples of that, but again, we'll talk about how unfortunately that kind of spoils it for everyone else, so to speak. I guess I can kind of say that. But yeah, so as you can see here, it focuses more on individual wealth and individual achievement. The citizen participation is encouraged as long as it's meant to further yourself and not necessarily for a collective group. And again, government can get involved, but as long as it's meant to assist the marketplace, to assist the economy. Like, so, if we need like temporary bailouts, because the economy's failing, um, individual political cultures would probably say just don't do that too often. But if it's unless it's like a real emergency, right? We're not just going to go and panic just because the stock market fell a couple of points, right? It's going to fix itself up. It's just the ebb and flow of the economy. So as you can see here, they're very focused on capitalistic viewpoints and the individualism that goes with that, right? And of course, not to redistribute wealth. So individualistic political cultures do not believe in raising taxes to fund more of these government programs, because, like I said, a lot of them just feel that government programs are just that that it just encourages lazy behavior. At least that's the way some of these people for individualistic political culture see it. Now, traditionalistic is very similar, but you could say it's probably like a more conservative. It's definitely more conservative than individualistic. So traditionalistic is what we tend to see in the southern United States, including Texas, right? So such as not just Texas, but also like the southern states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, uh, what is it, Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, those states. So in this culture, citizens technically believe in democracy, but do not encourage participation, and government activity is generally viewed with suspicion unless its purpose is to reinforce the power of elite. So this is the culture where people are just like, trust the elites, trust the rich people because they know best. Don't rock the boat too much. Don't upset the status quo too much. They've got everything under control, so don't bother, getting involved here. So they do, unfortunately, they do discourage. Um, they try to discourage participation, like in the political sense, because they feel that might upset the establishment too much. And government is viewed with suspicion. They are very much against government. They're definitely, traditionalistic, again, because they want to keep that tradition going, right? That's why it's called traditionalistic. They want to keep the status quo going, and they definitely are not in favor of too much government involvement, especially when it goes against the status quo of, kind of like, the people in power, so to speak. So yeah, traditionalistic definitely is something that we see like in the American South, and that's also contributes to why the lowest voter turnout rates tend to be in the American South here. So again, this is what I would say is probably the most important aspect of this chapter that I definitely want for you all to read up and understand, because the discussion question definitely asks which of these political cultures do you see in Texas here, which we kind of also mentioned. And again, and this goes more into detail in terms of the when we look at towards political participation. And so as you can see here, right, that individualistic is it's kind of like in the middle of these two, whereas moralistic and traditionalistic are definitely more on the moralistic is definitely more on the left, more liberal. Traditionalistic is a lot more conservative. Not to say that individualistic isn't conservative, but it's more so, but it's definitely not as conservative as you might see with traditionalistic. And so you can see how when we look at attitudes towards political parties, again, you can see this for yourself in terms of how it operates here, right? And where some of these groups that also some of these religious groups in terms of where they fall on this chart, as well as in the locations here. Okay, so really quick, just a couple of things that we'll talk about, and then we'll end for today. Okay, so let's also talk about some political ideologies, like we kind of referenced here before, right? So conservatism, sorry. Again, this is the major political culture in Texas. As I mentioned, Texas is a mix of traditionalistic and individualistic. So both of those political cultures do tend to lie on the conservative side here. So when we look at conservatism, and we'll compare it to liberalism, conservatism, a good way to sum up conservatism is that they don't want government regulation within the economy, but they do believe in government regulation within society for social issues. And then liberalism is the opposite, where liberals feel that there should be government regulation within the economy, but no government or little government regulation on the social issues. So it's a good way to remember because they're basically opposite. They're basically diametrically opposed here. So for the economy, for conservatives, they believe in a laissez-faire system. It's the French for let it be, right? The idea that the economy needs to be left alone. We don't want too much government involvement. If the government gets too involved in the economy, that's going to cause problems. The economy is a living, breathing organism that has its good days and its bad days, and it's just goes through the course of just living, right? No different than we have our good and bad days as well here. Of course, obviously, conservative economic policy is heavily influenced by capitalism and this idea of just allowing for the free markets to be able to operate without too much interference, and focusing on private industry, private ownership of industries, and focusing on allowing for people to be able to make as much money as possible, allowing for corporations to be able to maximize profits and all that stuff. And so conservatives definitely feel that they also feel that more industry should also be privatized. Some conservatives would feel like education would benefit from being privatized and things like that. So again, just in a nutshell, conservatives they're very lax on the economy in terms of not having too much government involvement. They would prefer hardly of any government involvement at all within the economy. That it should just be strictly private. For social issues, however, they do believe in government involvement. They do believe the government should regulate moral behavior. That's why a lot of social conservatives are very, like, when we look at the issues, they tend to be pro-life when it comes to the abortion issue. They do not believe that abortion should be legal. They also, in more recent years, they've come around to gay marriage a little bit more. Definitely, it wasn't the way it was like 20, 30 years ago. The abortion issue, they are still just as vehement on that one. And I would say probably because of the fact that the abortion action itself is very controversial. Ending terminating a pregnancy early is something that a lot of people have very strong opinions about, especially when it comes to the social conservatives. A lot of them would say that that counts as murder. That's what they say. But then, of course, you have people who disagree with that, right? That's of course the major question when it comes to the abortion issue, and that's why it's hard to be able to come up with any compromise. Because if you've got two groups that don't even agree on the ground rules for how the debate should start, because you have two groups that don't even believe that they disagree on, the status of the fetus, then it's going to be very hard for them to be able to compromise on anything further than that. So that's why it's very difficult to really reach any type of consensus on that issue. But yeah, so social conservatives are definitely in favor of regulating moral behavior. They're also not really in favor of legalizing marijuana, things like that, because they feel that would lead to like gateway drugs and all that stuff. And again, they're just very big on regulating moral behavior. Now, like I said, liberals are the opposites. Also, let me also say one more thing about economic conservatives is that conservatives also believe the strong argument that they make about maintaining less government control within the economy is that they would say that, okay, so these wealthy business owners, especially someone like Jeff Bezos, who started off, with his Amazon company, like just, trading, like just selling old books, and now it's, become one of the largest companies in the world. Conservatives would make the argument that, okay, so who should we trust more when it comes to starting a business? Should we trust a government official who it maybe has never started a business before? Or should we trust Jeff Bezos, who's actually demonstrated that he can start a business and can be successful? Again, I'm just giving you all the where they come from, right? And of course, it's up to you in terms of which of these two views you would rather believe in. But I'm giving you the arguments that they're making here. Now, liberals, they believe that there should be more government regulation, and then the arguments that they make is because they point to history. They say that, look, go back to the Gilded Age and go back to the union busting that was going on, where workers were trying to organize into unions, and you had these companies that were bringing in, armed security forces like the Pinkertons coming into, that were hired, to intimidate members from joining unions and to try to, stop worker strikes and all that stuff. So liberals would point to history and say, companies, we've allowed for you all to basically operate without regulations, and look how you've treated workers. So we do need regulations because we don't trust you all, to look out for the workers. So that's what they would say about when it comes to the economy. And then, of course, they would also say that they would also point out to other historical events such as, the stock market crash. Hey, we allowed for deregulation of the stock market and the economy, and look what happened. So we need more regulation to keep something like from that, to keep something from that ever happening again. So that's why they're very big on economic regulation, and they do also tend to be bigger on, some of these, social welfare programs. Like, so conservatives would be more in favor of cutting taxes, whereas liberals feel that there needs to be more tax revenue coming in, but not necessarily for the everyday workers. Liberals would feel more so that the more richer people should pay more in taxes, right? Though, you probably heard Bernie Sanders say, "Oh, they need to pay their fair share in taxes." So liberals would be more in favor of, the higher taxes, but more so for the wealthier income earners. And then for social issues, liberals, they oppose government interference because they feel that it's not the government's business to be deciding, what someone does in their bedroom, right? They don't believe that, that they shouldn't believe, they believe that, whoever wants to get married to whoever, provided of course that there's nothing illegal about it, that it's really nobody's business if it's a heterosexual marriage or a homosexual marriage, that's not, that they believe that homosexual couples should also get the same rights as heterosexual couples. They also are pro-choice on the abortion issue. They believe that, that an abortion is a woman's right to choose, to have control over her own body. And so liberals are more in favor of the on pro-choice when it comes to abortion and things like that. And they're also in favor of legalizing marijuana because they feel that, again, if somebody wants to smoke weed, that should be their prerogative. So again, so a good comparison between these two. Let's also talk about the this idea of how healthy Texas's economy is, right? So we do see that, and again, this is an interesting comparison here because, again, just like with a lot of things in the study of government and the study of society in general, it's not so straightforward, right? There are it's complicated, so to speak. So let's take a look at the first one here. So Texas as business friendly. So we had the CNBN's top state for business, right? So, and of course, and if you're familiar with Governor Greg Abbott, he definitely touts this a lot. He touts about how he posted something on Facebook a couple of weeks ago saying that Texas is, if you looked at Texas just by itself, it would be ranked in the top 10 in terms of the world economies, right? Like if Texas was its own country and you looked at the economic, if you look at the economic impact that Texas has in the United States, and you just isolated that from the United States, that Texas would be one of the top economies in the entire world. I believe he said top 10. I would have to double check that, but you can also look that up for yourself. But anyway, it is rather high in terms of the numbers that he brought up. So in terms of business, Texas is doing very well. And as I mentioned, I gave you several examples with more of these businesses coming over to Texas, such as Tesla and SpaceX and Oracle as well coming over, and all these other businesses, and a lot of them are moving over to Austin as well, which also contributes to the growth of Austin, but also contributes to the cost of living increase in the Austin area. We'll talk about more in this class. I've already mentioned that several times. As you can tell, I have some strong feelings about that, strong opinions about that. But anyway, so for business, Texas tends to be doing very well. However, does that also trickle down to everybody else in Texas? And as you can see here on the second one, Texas ranked 39th state by Prosperity Now. So let's take a look at some of these quality of life measures. So violent crime rate. Now, again, these statistics are a little bit outdated because the new textbook edition hasn't come out yet. So some of these are a little bit old here. But let's just take a look at them just, for reference sake. So violent crime rate, 17th. So a little bit more on the high side. Overall crime rate, a little bit towards the middle. Incarceration rate is really high. That's definitely in the top 10, 6. Percent of children living in poverty, also almost at the top, number 2. Overall child well-being, 43rd, so they rank in the bottom with child well-being. Total fossil fuel emissions ranks number 1. Toxic releases number 1. What's also interesting is that Texas is also going to be doing away with the inspection stickers. You can also look that up online. That's been a that's been something that has finally been put into that's been decided here at the state level. So we'll see. I mean, you can't move up past #1, right? But we'll see how much more, I guess, Texas goes up to #1 here. Average SAT score, 43rd. So again, in the bottom sector. Overall education score towards the middle bottom. Environmental quality rank, also towards the bottom. And economic well-being, 37th. So again, towards the middle of the bottom here. So again, these statistics, what they tell us is that yes, business is good in Texas, but it seems like it's good for the companies, but it might not necessarily be all that good for the workers, right? It might not necessarily be all that good for everyone else within society, right? And so again, one of the discussion questions that we mentioned at the beginning, where it asked, is Texas a good place to live? I mean, I don't have the answer to that, right? I mean, I think only you all could determine that, right? But I definitely am giving you all some interesting data to look at in terms of being able to determine for yourself. If we're just kind of discussing, if we're just kind of thinking out loud here, I know for me personally, I love my state. Like I said, my family's been here since probably the 1700s. So, especially like my South Texas region, I don't foresee myself. I don't think I could ever live anywhere else. Even though, I've always wanted to get like a place like in Houston, because Houston has a lot of diversity and it's got a lot of great food and all that. I don't think I'd want to live there full time because unfortunately, since I do like to do my exercise at night, you can't really exercise at night in a big city like that because of they close the parks as soon as the sun goes down. And I'm not a fan of that because but that just goes to show you, unfortunately those places are kind of dangerous. But yeah, so I do like my state, obviously, of course, but that doesn't mean that there aren't issues, right? And because I like my state so much, I don't believe that we should I'm not a fan of toxic positivity. I am not. If something is wrong, I believe that the best way to address it is to talk about it and to come up with solutions instead of just pretending that everything's okay when it's not. Because I'm sorry, but that just I cannot. That's not how I can live my life. If something's bothering me, I'm going to say it. Because it's something that's important. But the point is that as you can see, Texas definitely has some room to grow when it comes to some of these some of these statistics. And so I would certainly want to see Texas improve its education. And of course, we'll talk about education policy, and that's also a big issue in Texas right now in terms of the funding of education or the lack of funding in education. So that's definitely something that we could, we're going to take a look at in this class. We're also going to take a look at, the rising cost of living, which again, it's not necessarily a Texas issue. That's more of a national issue. But obviously, Texas, can Texas do something about that? So we'll see or things like that. But again, it is kind of a mixed bag. So yeah, if you want to make it big in Texas, that's definitely a place to be if you want to try to, be successful. But does it trickle down to everyone else? The numbers don't really reflect that. So, but again, we'll continue this discussion later on. Okay, so last thing we'll talk about here is the demographics, and then we'll go ahead and end for today. So the census, changing demographics. So I gave you all a little bit of that information last time where we talked about how that the Hispanic population has already eclipsed the Anglo population in Texas, and we'll see when Texas becomes a majority Hispanic state. It's not a majority Hispanic state yet. The Hispanics are the largest group, but they're not the majority. They would need to get over 50%. So we'll see if that eventually happens in the next couple of years here. But we do see that Texas's demographics are changing, where it's not just the Hispanics, but we also see more people coming over to Texas, more non-native Texans moving to Texas. And so what that does here is that does influence the political relevancy of the population. So we don't just have more Hispanics coming over to Texas. We also have, like I said, more transplants from other parts of the country. A lot of them coming over from California. So California does tend to be a rather liberal state. So they'll be bringing depending on who it is. Not every person coming over from California is liberal, but it seems like more so than not, the people that are coming from California, they do tend to be more liberal because there are more liberals in California than are conservatives. So although you do have a situation where some of the conservatives in California are leaving because they want to go to a conservative state. So we'll see if it kind of maybe balances it out in terms of the California transplants here. They're trying to do some data on that. They're still trying to do some research on that in terms of the political philosophies of the people coming over from California. But the point is that what I'm trying to say here is that that does have an influence. So with these increasing minority populations, they do trends towards increasing liberalism. Although what we also need to look at, and this is something that also is being discussed in more recent years, is the Hispanics in Texas are not all going to be liberals. They're not all going to be Democrats. We are seeing, even here in South Texas, we're seeing a shift to where there are more Republicans. Republicanism is becoming more popular here in South Texas. Again, I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen as many Republican signs as I see now in the last couple of years. Now, the key question is that the Trump effect, or is it something that's here to stay? I think it's kind of a little bit of both. I do believe that as more time goes on, I do believe that it's going to be less about Trump. I mean, he's the one that definitely started this in terms of more Republicanism coming to South Texas. But, and not to say that there weren't other Republicans here, but he's the one that's kind of galvanized this region to where there is more Republican support. However, he's not going to be around forever. So we'll see how much longer this. I do my hypothesis is that I do believe that this is going to be something of a constant here. So we'll see, how the Democrats respond to that in terms of your look. But again, I just want to give you all some examples that yes, more Hispanics coming over can also help to turn, to make Texas a little bit more competitive, because there's been talk for several years within Democratic circles, is Texas a battleground state? I mean, we'll see how this presidential election goes, because we do have a major Senate race between Ted Cruz and Colin Aldred. So we'll see, and Colin Aldred he is looked at as a rather popular centrist Democrat. I mean, he's a former NFL player, so maybe he can use that star power, to his advantage. But we will see how that goes here. But yes, that is a key question, and I am interested as a political scientist to look at how the numbers come out within this election. I do want to see, are Republicans making a lot of gains in South Texas, and are Democrats making more gains in more of these urban areas? Because what I also want to show to you all, as you'll see here in this map here, and we'll go over the numbers a little bit later when we get to the election chapter, how Democrats and Republicans do across the state. So then larger, of course, influence on the political process as we have more and more people registering to vote in Texas. That's just going to make these elections matter more, because now there's more people that are going to get involved. And so elections are going to be even more important, because now there's more voters to try to get on your side, right? So that also means that there's going to be a lot more political money coming to Texas. There's going to be a lot more political infrastructure. Both the Democrats and Republicans are going to be throwing more resources when it comes to Texas, setting up more election headquarters, hiring more of these grassroots organizers to go and try to knock on doors and call voters for both political parties. There's going to be a lot more of that. So Texas is definitely going to be an interesting place politically for the foreseeable future, because of the increase in growth, and because of the increase in growth, they definitely are going to be important when it comes to the electoral college, because Texas has the second highest number of electoral votes, because we've got the second highest number of people. So that, of course, is going to generate a lot of political attention here. Okay, last thing that I want for us to take a look at. Now, this was the most recent presidential election. Again, we got this one coming up in a few actually it's a few weeks, right? Not even months. So of course you see Donald Trump, he wins Texas by about 600,000 votes. So you might think to yourself, okay, that's not too big of a victory here. But still rather sizable here when it comes to it's not like what you saw like in Georgia or Arizona, where Biden was able to win by about 10,000 votes. Like, it wasn't that close here, which is also somewhat similar to the numbers that we also saw in the 2018 senatorial race between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. The numbers were somewhat similar to this. So as you can see here in this map, you might think to yourself, oh, like Texas is overwhelmingly red. So why is it that Trump only won by 600,000? Well, yes, he won almost all the counties, but how many people live out here? Very few people live out here. I've actually driven through here from Lubbock, Amarillo, down through Sweetwater, and going through towns like Eden and Menard and Ballinger and Brady, and there's hardly anybody that lives out here. The same thing over here in East Texas, right? There's hardly anybody that lives out here, like in Lufkin, Nacogdoches, towns like DeBoll and Livingston and all that. You know, very very few people live out here in this part of Texas, as well as over here, like in the Panhandle, right? You know, a couple of major cities, maybe like San Angelo, Midland, Odessa, and like I said, Nacogdoches and Lufkin, but very few people like, you know, in between these areas. So the point is that yes, the Republicans win these counties, but there's hardly anybody that lives. The Democrats do well in the urban areas, right? Like, you know, the DFW area. Although they don't do really that well in Fort Worth. Fort Worth is Tarrant County over here. That's a little bit more conservative than over here in Dallas County. Houston area, Democrats do well, except for Montgomery County up here, which is where the Woodlands and Conroe's at. Conroe's actually a very conservative area. So, and part of the reason is that because this is kind of a more affluent area. This is, you know, the Woodlands is probably regarded as one of the richest areas in the whole Houston metro area. So, and because there usually is a correlation between people earning more money and being more Republican, it makes sense that the more richer areas are going to have more. They're going to be more on the Republican side, as well as the San Antonio Austin I-35 corridor, except for Comal County, which is New Braunfels, which is a little bit more conservative, because it's a little more rural. And then obviously here in South Texas and along and El Paso along the border, although not all the border areas are blue. Zapata County over here, that's an interesting one. So me personally, since my family grew up over here on the western edge of Stark County over here in Roma, Texas. Zapata County is actually very close to Roma. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll be active out there and see what, you know, I mean, I know why it's happening, because there's a lot of the ranchers tend to be wealthier, and so they tend to influence the vote out here. Corpus Christi is also kind of a little bit of a battleground area, but in these coastal bend areas, there are a lot of Hispanics and a lot of African Americans, but they don't really vote. So that's one of the major issues. But anyway, but the point I'm trying to make here is that another major reason why the Democrats have not been able to win in Texas is because if you also look at this map doesn't show you all because it's not an interactive one, but if you go to this site, it'll show you all the interactive numbers here. And what I want you all to look at, if you have time, is look at how the Democrats get blown out in these areas. Like, yes, nobody lives up here, but the Democrats are maybe getting like 5-10% of the vote out here. Whereas in the urban areas, yes, Democrats win them, but you still have a lot of Republican votes in Harris County. Like Harris County probably usually goes 2-1, like 67% Democrat, 33% Republican. That's still a major percentage. So what I've said, and I keep telling the Democrats, is I've said, hey, I'm not saying that you all need to win these areas, because that's probably not going to happen, but just don't get blown out in them. You know, like see if you can maybe get like a third of the vote out there, and maybe that could try to, you know, instead of just maybe trying to run up the score in the urban areas, see if you can try to pick up some votes out here. Maybe at least maybe get like a fourth of the vote. Maybe that could, you know. So that's been my suggestion. You know, and I know that requires a lot of money and a lot of time, especially because of how vast Texas is. As someone who's driven across the state the last couple of years, I do understand that that's easier said than done. But if they want to win, I mean, that's, you know, that they gotta try, you know, what they need to do. So anyway, but it is what it is. I'm just giving you all my analysis here. So okay, all right. So we'll go ahead and stop here for today. Let me go ahead and stop the share. So okay, so sorry that took way too long. It was almost an extra hour long. That I guess kind of makes up for me being out that day. So okay, so we're gonna stop here for today.